The sound of shattering glass echoed through the empty boardroom. I watched the framed photograph of my father, the man whose funeral I had attended less than 24 hours ago, bounce off the bottom of the metal trash can. Baron did not even flinch. He just stood at the head of the table, straightening the cuffs of his imported suit. He looked me dead in the eye, a cold smirk playing on his lips. "Save the crocodile tears," he said, his voice dripping with venom. "You are just a glorified secretary sitting in that chair because of your last name. You are fired. Pack your desk." I looked past him at Gideon and Stacy, our two senior board members. They did not blink. They did not speak. They just kept their eyes glued to their phones, brutally silent in their complicity. I knelt on the plush carpet. A jagged piece of glass bit into my thumb as I reached into the trash. But I ignored the sting. I pulled my father's picture from the wreckage. I brushed the sparkling dust off his smiling face, tucked the frame tightly under my arm, and walked out of the room. The heavy oak doors clicked shut behind me. At 32, I was the chief operating officer of this company. I had spent the last decade pulling all-nighters, sleeping on a cot in the memorial lab, and building the core medical technology that kept this firm alive. Baron spent that exact same decade bouncing between European ski resorts, systematically incinerating his trust fund. He was not just throwing his weight around. Today, he was drowning. The whisper in the financial circles was loud and clear. Baron owed $30 million to some incredibly ruthless private equity sharks. His back was pinned against the wall. To save himself, he needed cash fast. So, he bought off Gideon and Stacy. He promised them massive golden parachutes to form a 40% voting bloc. That unholy alliance completely outweighed my 49% inheritance. He orchestrated this ambush to force a rapid sale of my father's life's work just to bail himself out of a massive hole. They thought I would break. They assumed I would throw a tantrum or beg for my job, but they vastly underestimated who they were dealing with. The elevator dropped to the basement. I walked out into the concrete parking garage, my heels echoing in the hollow space. I unlocked my car, slid into the driver's seat, and slammed the door. My hands gripped the leather steering wheel until my knuckles turned stark white. A heavy lump formed in my throat, threatening to choke me. I swallowed it down hard. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. The screen lit up the dark interior of the car. I opened a text thread with Nicole, my closest friend and an absolute shark of a corporate attorney. I typed 3 words and hit send. "It is time. Initiate." My phone buzzed in the cup holder. A company-wide email alert. Subject line read, "Leadership transition." I tapped the glowing screen. Baron could not even wait a full hour. He had blasted a message to all 400 employees. At the very bottom, beneath the sterile corporate jargon about restructuring and new horizons, he added a personal sign-off. "The princess has left the castle. Time to get back to real work." My jaw clenched so hard my teeth HDHD. Before I could even toss the phone onto the passenger seat, the screen flashed with an incoming call. It was Dr. Thomas. He had run our research and development division since I was in middle school. "Sarah," he gasped. His voice trembled, completely stripped of its usual calm authority. "He is destroying it." "Destroying what?" "Thomas, the memorial lab." My stomach dropped. The air in the car suddenly felt suffocatingly thin. That lab held my mother's name etched in bronze on the door. It was the exact room where my father finalized the formula for his first successful clinical trial. Baron just signed the work order. Dr. Thomas continued, the panic thick in his throat. "Demolition starts on Monday. He is gutting the clean rooms to build a VIP executive lounge." But Carrara, that is not the worst part. I gripped the steering wheel. "He is selling the intellectual property, the entire autoimmune patent portfolio, the exact therapy that gave your father 3 extra years of life. He is handing it over to Vanguard Medical for pennies on the dollar. The final paperwork is being drafted right now." Vanguard. The vulture capitalists my father absolutely despised. Baron was stripping the soul out of our life's work just to secure a $50 million golden parachute for himself and his cronies. He was going to burn down a legacy of saving human lives just so he could pay off his private equity bookies and buy another yacht. This was no longer just a bitter family feud over a leather chair in a boardroom. This was a hostage situation. Barron was a deeply insecure, terrified man wielding a wrecking ball, and he was swinging it directly at my family's heart. I hung up the phone. The shock vanished, replaced by pure ice-cold adrenaline. I shifted the car into drive and sped out of the garage. Barron believed power lived inside custom Italian suits and closed-door boardrooms. He thought the people who mopped the lab floors and guarded the gates were completely invisible. He spent weeks buying off the wealthy directors, totally blind to the actual foundation of the company. That arrogant delusion was his fatal flaw. Years ago, my father established an employee stock ownership plan. He granted 11% of the company to the original founding blue-collar workers, the lifers. Barron treated them like disposable furniture. I treated them like family. I drove straight to the working-class neighborhood on the south side of the city. I sat at Maria's cramped kitchen table. She had cleaned our laboratories for 15 years. Hank, our senior security guard, sat right next to her, still wearing his badge. I skipped the corporate speeches. I slid Barron's demolition order and the Vanguard sale contract across the scratched wood. They read the paperwork. They saw exactly how little Barron valued their sweat and loyalty. Hank's jaw tightened into stone. Maria's hands shook, not from sadness, but from pure, unadulterated rage. I pushed a single legal document toward them, an irrevocable voting proxy. "Keep your shares," I told them, my voice completely steady. "Keep your dividends. You earned every single penny. Just lend me your voice in the boardroom today. Let me hold the microphone." Maria grabbed the pen and signed her name with brutal force. Hank took the pen next. Within 2 hours, I visited 6 more original employees. Mechanics, warehouse leads, night shift supervisors, every single one of them signed the proxy without a second of hesitation. I bypassed the banks. I skipped the multi-million-dollar buyout negotiations by leveraging the sheer loyalty my father left behind, my voting power legally, and instantly jumped to an absolute 60% majority. I possessed the ultimate weapon, and Barron had absolutely no idea it was pointed right at his head. The main lobby buzzed with a frantic, terrified energy. 400 employees stood packed shoulder to shoulder for the mandatory town hall meeting. At the front, standing on a raised platform, Barron held a crystal champagne flute. He wore a sickeningly bright smile. He spoke smoothly into the microphone, spinning the absolute destruction of my father's life's work as a strategic merger and referring to the impending mass layoffs as necessary operational streamlining. Gideon and Stacy stood right behind him, clapping like trained seals. I pushed through the heavy double doors at the back of the room. The crowd parted instantly, creating a dead-straight path to the podium. His past insult echoed in my head, cold and arrogant, just a glorified secretary. But the woman walking down that aisle was not a secretary. She was an executioner. I marched straight up the steps of the platform. Barron stopped mid-sentence, his fake smile faltered. "What is she doing here?" He hissed at Stacy, covering the microphone with his hand. "Call security." I stepped right into his personal space and slammed a heavy manila folder directly onto the podium, right over his neatly printed cards. "This is a written consent of shareholders," I said, leaning into the microphone, my voice sliced through the absolute silence of the massive room. "Signed and legally executed 10 minutes ago by a 60% absolute voting majority." Barron stared at the thick stack of papers. His brain simply refused to comprehend the words. "Effective immediately, the board of directors is completely dissolved," I continued. I turned my head to look Gideon and Stacy dead in the eye. They stepped backward as if they had been physically struck. "And Barron, your contract as chief executive officer is permanently terminated. You do not work here anymore." Barron's hand began to shake violently. The crystal champagne flute slipped from his trembling fingers. It shattered against the hard floor, splashing expensive wine all over his polished Italian shoes. All the color completely drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly pale gray. The smug, untouchable billionaire vanished. In his place stood a desperate, sweating man realizing his $30 million lifeline had just been cut. "You cannot do this," he screamed, his voice cracking. A thick bead of sweat rolled down his forehead. "Security, get this lunatic out of my building." I stepped back from the podium and looked calmly toward the main entrance. "Hank," I called out. Hank stepped forward from the edge of the crowd. He adjusted the heavy radio belt around his waist and cracked a wide, deeply satisfied smirk. "Please escort the former chief executive officer off our property," I instructed. Hank marched right up the stairs. He did not ask politely. He grabbed Baron firmly by the bicep, his thick fingers digging deep into the expensive wool of Baron's custom suit. Baron thrashed and sputtered, spitting panicked threats about lawsuits and trespassing. But Hank just yanked him forward, physically dragging him down the center aisle. In the front row, Maria crossed her arms over her blue janitorial uniform. A slow, proud smile spread across her face. Someone in the back started clapping. Within 3 seconds, the entire lobby erupted into deafening applause. I stood at the podium, looking out over the sea of faces, finally breathing in the clean air. Later that night, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. The screen lit up the dark bedroom with a single text message from Baron. "You only got an empty shell." He thought he was a genius. He assumed I was just a naive girl who did not know about the secret hardware key he kept hidden in his briefcase. Driven by pure spite and $30 million of debt, he logged into our servers from his mansion. He planned to download the core intellectual property and sell it to Vanguard Medical on the black market before his termination was fully processed. What he did not know was that Nicole and I had been waiting for this exact move. We did not lock him out of the system. We built a door, left it wide open, and turned on the lights. Our technical team had already corralled his specific login into a secure sandbox honeypot. The files he frantically downloaded were not our life-saving patents. They were watermarked dummy data, heavily monitored by the Federal Cybercrimes Task Force. Every single click, every single transferred file was a time-stamped felony for federal economic espionage. If he had just walked away after I fired him, he would have only lost his job. He could have taken his expensive suits and figured out his massive debt on his own. But his fragile ego could not handle losing to me. His profound greed, his absolute inability to accept defeat from a woman he considered completely beneath him, dug his own grave. I did not destroy Baron. I just handed him a shovel. At exactly 6 o'clock the next morning, federal agents kicked down the custom mahogany front door of his estate. They dragged him out onto his manicured lawn in his silk pajamas, his hands firmly cuffed behind his back. By noon, Gideon and Stacy submitted their unconditional resignations in a desperate bid to avoid federal conspiracy charges. I walked down to the memorial lab and handed the master keys back to Dr. Thomas. Our legacy was finally safe. The gavel came down exactly 3 months later. The judge sentenced Baron to 84 months in a federal penitentiary for economic espionage with no possibility of parole before serving at least 60 months. The court also ordered a total restitution of $30 million to be liquidated from his remaining personal assets. He lost the mansion. He lost the imported sports cars. He lost absolutely everything. Gideon and Stacy avoided a prison cell. But the Securities and Exchange Commission permanently barred them from serving on any corporate board, slapping them each with a $250,000 fine. But the legal ruin was not the worst part for Baron. It was the social erasure. His elite country club publicly revoked his membership. The people he used to drink thousand scotch with suddenly found themselves entirely unable to remember his name. He became a ghost in his own city. 6 months into his sentence, a flimsy paper envelope arrived at my office. It was stamped from a federal correctional facility. I recognized his messy handwriting immediately. He wrote 4 pages about how the immense pressure got to him, how he was just trying to protect our family's wealth, how our father would have wanted us to forgive each other. He even had the absolute nerve to ask me to deposit money into his commissary account. I read the entire thing standing by the window. My pulse remained completely steady. The burning rage I used to carry was entirely gone, replaced by a cold, peaceful indifference. I folded the letter perfectly in half and dropped it straight into the paper shredder. The machine whirred for exactly 3 seconds. The last piece of him turned to confetti. The air inside our building feels entirely different now. It feels incredibly light. I officially promoted Dr. Thomas to the board of directors. Hank now runs our entire regional security division, and Maria's granddaughter just started an internship in our accounting department, fully paid for by a scholarship fund. We established in my mother's name. Every Friday night, Nicole and I order takeout and sit on the roof of the memorial lab, watching the city lights stretch out into the dark. I am surrounded by people who do not just share a payroll, but share a purpose. This is my chosen family. The chaos is finally over. We are just building. I am sitting at my father's desk right now. The city skyline is glowing behind me. And for the first time in my life, I know exactly why I belong in this chair. Men like Baron are dangerous because they are fundamentally hollow. Narcissists operate under the delusion that the world owes them a soft landing. They mistake what they inherited for what they earned. Their profound insecurity makes them incredibly desperate. And that desperation makes them totally blind to the immense strength of the people they consider beneath them. If you are dealing with a toxic narcissist right now, I need you to understand 3 things. Rule number 1, titles do not buy loyalty. A fancy business card might make people fear you, but real power is earned by respecting the invisible people who actually keep the lights on. Rule number 2, never back a grieving person into a corner. When Baron threw away my father's photo, he thought he was asserting dominance. Instead, he completely freed me from my last remaining moral restraint. By trying to break me, he created his own worst nightmare. And rule number 3, the ultimate revenge is calculated. Legal silence. You do not need to scream. You do not need to throw a tantrum. You just build a door, leave it completely unlocked, and let the villain's own boundless greed walk them right into a prison cell. Have you ever had everything taken from you by someone who thought you were too weak to fight back? Tell me how you built your empire from their ashes in the comments below. And share this video with someone who needs a reminder today. No one can extinguish your fire unless you hand them the water. Welcome back. I know exactly what you are screaming at the screen right now. You are sitting there wondering why on earth did Sarah spend 10 years pulling all-nighters in a lab while her arrogant stepbrother burned through his trust fund. Why did she wait until her father died and she was publicly fired to finally put her foot down and strike back? It is easy to judge from the outside, but let me explain the psychology of toxic family dynamics. Carrara was not stupid and she certainly was not weak. She was trapped in something called the slot machine effect, also known in psychology as intermittent reinforcement. When you deal with a narcissist like Baron or a complicated family business, they do not treat you terribly 100% of the time. Every once in a while, they give you a tiny crumb of validation, a polite smile at a dinner, a vague promise that your hard work will eventually pay off when the time is right. You keep pulling the lever, pouring in your time, your health, and your sanity, hoping for that jackpot of genuine respect. But the house always wins until you finally decide to walk out of the casino. When Sarah finally did walk away, she executed an absolute masterclass in financial self-defense. Let us break down her specific smart moves so you can use them in your own life. First, we have the audit strategy. Scammers, manipulators, and toxic people absolutely hate the details. Baron thought power was just wearing a custom suit and paying off 2 board members. He completely ignored the fine print, specifically the 11% employee stock ownership plan. Sarah audited her environment. She knew exactly where the hidden leverage lived. If someone is trying to force you out of a business, a lease, or an inheritance, stop arguing with them and start reading the fine print. Second, the buyout. Sierra did not try to match Baron's millions to buy back the company. She went straight to the janitor and the security guard and secured irrevocable voting proxies. She leveraged genuine respect to buy her freedom. In real life, your ultimate currency is not always cash. Sometimes your greatest asset is the relationships you have built with the people the arrogant guys ignore. Third, building the case. Notice how Sarah and her lawyer handled the late-night cyber theft. They did not just lock the server doors or call Baron to yell at him. They built a honeypot. They documented every single click Baron made and let him handle his own felony directly to the federal agents. If you are dealing with a toxic ex or a corrupt business partner, do not interrupt them when they are making a mistake. Let them act. Document their choices quietly and build an airtight case. Here is the final verdict. Your legacy, your money, and your peace of mind are worth protecting, but you cannot protect them with raw emotions. You protect them with strategy, firm boundaries, and cold, hard facts. You are always allowed to walk away from people who hurt you, even if you share a last name. Have you ever had to use the audit strategy or build a case against a toxic person in your own life? Drop your story in the comments below. Do not forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the psychology of survival.